I think the sport owe him so much. We all owe him as players. I was obviously lucky enough to be really close to him. Yeah, I mean, he just, the history we have in the sport, the PSC history, the history before the PSC tour started. Yeah, to be part of that history is a great honor, but that history wouldn't have been there anyways unless these guys have created the work for us to follow, So yeah, we're all really feel lucky to have someone as great as Jonah to make it a bit easier for us a little bit after.
I mean, I don't know of anyone in any other sport that's achieved what Jonah has. It's not really about what he's achieved just on the court. I think it's also about what he's achieved off the court. And I guess as different eras sort of roll by, it's quite easy to take for granted, and it's quite easy to forget just how this sport's probably started at a professional level, and ultimately that was pretty much down to one man, which is pretty incredible to think of. How sport has evolved nowadays, to think that essentially one person, dragging along a few others can essentially start a professional sport. So I don't know what word you would use to describe that kind of influence on a sport. And I'm not, the legends and all these kind of things, I just don't quite think does Jonah justice. So he's done an incredible amount, and I guess still is as well, and he's still heavily in love with the game and still follows it on a daily basis.
Without Jonah, I don't even know how long it would have been taken before the actual professional game would have got off the ground, because he was really the first person to decide, I just want to play squash and try and make a living out of it rather than just be a teaching pro. And as a consequence, he turned professional, and then he tried to persuade me to turn professional straight afterwards, but I was studying at university and I didn't want to do it. I really had no thoughts of doing that. In fact, it was only through Jonah I would never become a professional, I don't think, really. And so he virtually taught me into it over a period of a year or two, and I decided, well, let's give it a try. And I then recruited another fellow, Kenny Hisco, from Australian, and we toured together. And Jonah, in particular, was instrumental, I think, in every one of us starting. I mean, I think he even meant that Abu Talib, who was at the end of his career, probably, he also toured with Jonah, and he took a troop of people around the world. So his impact on squash in the professional game is fabulous. I mean, you couldn't have got there without him, I don't think.
Yeah, I was very aware that he was a bit of a legend and a superstar, certainly a superstar, like a superhero at my age at that time. I was, as young as kind of 5 years old, really 4 or 5 years old, when I can actually register a few things. It was all very apparent, and also as I got a little bit older, when we were still living in Solihull, it was with the gym. We had a gym at the house, the old house there, and I used to sit and watch him training and be fascinated by what he was doing and everything else. And obviously his physique was amazing, and it just looked like something out of the comic books and stuff that I was reading and stuff. He was just different. He was very different to your average dad. But it was good. It was cool. It was exciting. Didn't see a massive amount of him here and there, but it was exciting. And when he was with us, which was cool. I'm beyond proud. There's not one person since squash has been in the public eye that has transcended the sport, and he's the only person that's transcended the sport. People still know his name today. The fact that he's 80 years of age, he's still been heavily involved in the game for a long period of time. Not so much now, but obviously with the work he was doing for so many years with Mohamed, and obviously all the previous accolades that he achieved in his coaching career, let alone playing career. But yeah, no, it is fascinating for me because I managed to look at some of the BBC archive footage of my dad on TV shows, Questions of Sport, and other documentaries and stuff that I've seen from the BBC through the 70s and 80s, and it's just amazing. It's just so surreal. It was, you know, primetime TV, and he was in, and we've got all the newspaper articles of him on the front page of the major newspapers throughout. And it was just extraordinary what he did for the sport. But it's just very exciting. Those people come once in a blue moon, once in a couple of generations possibly. And he certainly came in for squash, and thank goodness he did, because you wouldn't be here interviewing me, and I certainly wouldn't be on the TV talking in strange voices.
He was one of the, as you say, the pioneer who took squash to the next level. It went from the amateur sport to the professional, and he was the person, the main person that got this going. And as we know, he's just an amazing motivator. So he was able to motivate all the then amateur players to become professional. And now we have the tour as it is today. And, you know, everything has to start somewhere. And he is just so amazing, and he got that going. And hard work, a lot of dedication, and look where our sport is today.
I suppose, you know, at the time he was the best player, kind of in the late 60s, early 70s. He was the best player in the world. So, he had a good, he had a kind of good platform to take things forward. But I think, so there was definitely that side of things that kind of gave him a good kind of a good platform. But a lot of it is down to his character and just the way he is as a person, and of how inspirational he is in terms of I suppose how he speaks to people, how he motivates people, how he comes across in the media. He was almost kind of born to entertain, but also to get people's attention. So squash was just very lucky that everything kind of fitted together, and he really was the kind of the perfect person to drive squash forward. And also he was, even outside of squash, he was known as one of the fittest people in the world, and that really, his kind of relentless drive on the kind of the fitness side of things also was great for squash, because that became synonymous with squash, the fact that you needed to be extremely fit, and he kind of pushed that agenda forward really well, as well as everything else. So yeah, I think it was definitely his character, and the fact that he was obviously extremely successful as well. I mean, he was on kind of some mainstream BBC programs at the time, prime time programs. He was on it was probably programs that you might not have heard of, but things like Superstars, which had all the kind of the top sporting greats and kind of different sports. He figured on that. Obviously, things like Question the Sport as well. But so he became kind of like a national figure outside of squash as well, which probably hasn't been known since, especially in the UK.
Jonah's influence on squash has been greater than anybody else that has ever played the game. Without him, in my view, the professional game wouldn't exist as we know it now. He was the first guy who obviously was instigated setting up ISPA, International Squash Players Association, which is what now is known as PSA. And the game was an amateur game. It was a very amateur game. He made that gap from amateur to professional smooth, and he meant that they had a travelling circuit for all the players playing. In the 70s, everybody knew him. If you asked anybody on the street who Jonah Barrington was, everybody knew him. Whereas now we haven't got the same sort of superstars in squash, unfortunately, but he was an absolute superstar, not just in squash, but in sport. He was known as the fittest man in the world, and he probably was the fittest man in the world at that time. And he brought the game a completely new dimension to squash, and he popularised it all over the world, not just in the UK, worldwide.
Jonah has changed completely my life. I came to Millfield School when I was 15 years old. I came to England, I couldn't speak English. Very basic English because I was in a French school, and he took care of me. He made sure I was fine. The only language I needed someone to speak to me at that time was the language of squash, and he knew that better than everyone else. And we connected straight away from the first day, and he taught me a lot. He took care of me as a father who took care of his kid. He was my guardian in England. He did so much for me, and I will forever be grateful for everything he has done for me.
Actually, the first ever professional match that I ever watched was Jonah, which was in the British Closed. And actually, Jonah was 40 at the time, so almost exactly 40 years ago. Jonah was 40 and still a professional player, but obviously 40 years old is it's difficult to compete at the highest level. And he actually went on to win the British Closed and beat a young professional at the time called Gwen Bryars, who I think was in the top 10 in the world. So even that, to watch that as my first ever professional match was pretty special.
Obviously, as a kid, I knew the name, had the pleasure of meeting him. And as soon as I did, I loved him. His personality is just so infectious. He's amazing. He had a massive impact. People still remember that name today. I
was very lucky. I lived in Solihull, and I first met Jonah. I was a young man playing squash at a little, very small club, Knowle Dorridge. I was invited by a chairman of a club called West Warwicks to join there. They gave me a membership there. I was a promising junior. Didn't really know too much about it. I had a little bit of ability, and they said that Jonah played there. And of course, everyone knew Jonah, who he was. So I was incredibly excited. So I would have first met him. It would have been round about, I would have been 15 or 16 years old, and I was a loose cannon. So that would have been about 1980. And it was just amazing. The first time I met him, I think, probably embarrassing enough, it's probably in the change rooms. I think he's fully clothed, but he was just sat there listening to the guy. He'd have a shower, you'd hear him talk before he went on the shower, you'd hear him talk afterwards, and it was just so inspirational. And that first time I met him, I just thought, it was incredible, really. Had a real effect on me in so many different ways, not through squash, but in life generally. And I was at school then, and I'd sort of have an afternoon off school when I should have been at school ever or college, and I just watch him practice. I was very happy to watch him practice. I could watch him do a solo. He did these incredible sessions with Bomber Harris, which I'd watch him play, and then I'd just try and emulate that. I'd go outside and go off the court next door, and I'd just try and copy what he'd done. So he was a huge influence at a very young age, and he had this charisma about him that was just so special. This, again, many people talk about it, that force of personality. It just inspired you. The incredible intelligence and the depth of knowledge about sport and squash specifically was just astonishing.
Every squash session we had, there was always ghosting in it. He always told me solo practices, but that's something I love to do anyway, so I always did. We always used to speak before every single match before I went on court. In terms of the mental side of the game, he's the best I have ever worked with. No one is like him when it comes to the mental side of the game. He was unbelievable, and he taught me so much about the mental side of the sport. And to this day, every single piece of advice he gave me is still living with me, and it's one of the main reasons of why I'm still doing what I'm doing till today. I won this event firstly because of him, because I had a very good season that year, and I actually sustained an injury in my first round against James ElShorbagy. James was not playing very well at that time. He was just coming back from an injury and stuff. So James was unseeded in tournaments, so I had him first round, and I got injured. And that I had a slip and I got injured, and I didn't know how bad it was. It was in my hamstring. It was a grade 1 strain, and in my third round against Borja, I won 3-2, almost lost because I was so scared to launch, but luckily it was the last tournament of the season. Then Jonah told me, would you want to lose and pull out of the tournament because you're injured, or do you want to push your injury a little bit and maybe it's going to get worse a little bit, and instead of take 4 weeks to recover, you might take 6 weeks, but you'll win the tournament, or pull out and see someone else holding the trophy and live with it, and seeing that picture for the rest of the whole summer till the next season starts. And then I told him, I want to win this tournament, I want to hold this title. And then because he told me this, my mentality completely changed. And then I started, okay, there is pain there, but if mentally you're strong and you're pushing yourself, the pain was there, but it was not enough to stop me from running, So yeah, I went back the day after, beat Rotten 3-love, beat Nick in the semi 3-1, and then beat Greg in the final 3-2. I think when I went 2-1 down, I won the first game. Then I lost the second and the third easy. Couldn't play Greg. And then once I went to court, I told my mom, get me Jonah on the phone right now. It was the only time in my life I spoke to Jonah on the phone, and during a match. And I spoke to Jonah. I told Jonah, I don't know what to do. He's playing so well. I don't know how to beat this guy today. And then he told me, listen, you're a warrior. Make this match like a war. Start to hit the ball hard, as hard as you can, and get everything back. And let's see how long he can survive with you. And that's what I did. And it was a hard fourth game. I won it 11-8. And then I had him physically, but I wouldn't have won that match unless it was for Jonah. And I won this title. And then I called Jonah straight after. And then I told Jonah, see, I have my name now beside your name. And then he told me, yeah, but you still have 5 more to go to win it 6 times like me. And then I told Jonah, well, who knows? Maybe I can try and win it more than you. And I have 3 more to go. 3 more to go to equal his record.
He will have had more impact on my career from a personal level than he would ever know. And, you know, he would never take any kind of that credit and never, ever does. But I was very, very lucky to spend, you know, a good number of times with Jonah as a younger professional player, you know, coming out of juniors, going into seniors, and probably at a time where I really needed someone to, you know, to just point me in the right direction, but just give me, you know, the things that I really needed to focus on to go to the next level. And obviously, when I was talking about the next level, I was meaning to the very top of the world. And you know, he did that in a way that you know, he would never know the impact that he had. But I certainly don't think that I would have achieved what I achieved without Jonah's influence.
Yeah, we egged each other on, but there were a few other good players around in the world as well, and that was also, from my perspective, I mean, all I wanted to do was win. And once I got I suppose the urge to want to play, and you know, the feeling of it was he provided the spark to me. And from there on in, you know, away I went with it and just did my best to try and win whatever I was playing or whoever I was up against. But he was very good to me in the early days in terms of trying to encourage me to play and get me there. And I suppose on the court itself, we used to, wouldn't say we'd fight, but we had some pretty tight, hard games against each other. There was no love lost on the court, I can tell you that now. You know, we at times, I mean, he was a terrible loser. He'd come off the court if he lost, and you didn't want to know him. The press couldn't go anywhere near him, so you know, and from my perspective, I found it quite difficult, you know, handling you know, his moods and the way he was at that stage. But as soon as funny enough, when we stopped competing against each other and stopped playing, we became very friendly and quite good friends. And that was the nice part about it. You know, despite the fact we had the rivalry and it was difficult at times, I think we both appreciated the other. I certainly did what he did for squash and what he was and how he'd helped me. And so it was nice to end up on a real friendly note at the end of our careers.
That was amazing. I just even look at it now, and I was just so lucky. I was obviously still playing then, but commentating. I'd started out commentating, and he got on the train from we live in Somerset now, and he got on the train, which is about an hour and 50 minutes. Travelled up in the morning, he wears contact lenses, and he was that tired from getting up early and having to travel because when we did that, he was in his early 70s, and he couldn't put the contact lens in. So he only had one contact, and he is very blind. He only had one contact lens in when he turned up. He was wearing his usual kind of Nike gear, which he loves, and he used to be sponsored by, and he loves all that gear. But he was wearing Nike skateboarding, non-marking. Tim Garner wouldn't have non-marking on his court shoes, but he's a size UK 11, and he's lost a lot of weight and muscle now. He's still in great shape. He looked like a golf club, and he turned up, and it was just unbelievable. So I was playing with the wooden racket, and he was. We were doing it for Dunlop, it was cool, really, really cool. So I was using Dunlop at the time, and he'd been massive Dunlop sponsored player for so long. And it was unbelievable playing with the wooden racket on there, him with the normal big-headed racket. And we had a condition of I could hit everything to the back of the court. He could play everywhere. And he chopped me up, really. He chopped me up. And he was probably 71, I think, at that time. Bearing in mind he hadn't been on a glass court for God knows how long, and they're not easy on glass courts. But yeah, it was wicked. I loved it. And it's on, you know, it's recorded, it's on there, and I can always watch back, and it's there for life, which is fantastic for me and for my my kids as well.
Well, I think I probably met him once or twice very briefly when I was on tour and as a player. But one of my first real recollections was I was in Malaysia and I won my first world title. And I had one of those matches where I just played really well. Everything just worked perfectly. And Jonah came up to me after the match and I think he used the words clinical, very clinical. And he basically intimated he was so impressed with my match that day. And I just remember, I think I looked at him, my eyes went wide and I'm like, it was the recognition of Jonah thought my match was great. It was Jonah Barrington and the fact that he watched it and he was there. And I just loved it. And then it was after that I had the pleasure of more opportunities to meet him because I was on tour and I was doing okay, coming through the rankings and winning titles, but it led to an opportunity for me to go training with him at Millfield.
Some of his training sessions were very, 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 very interesting. And even, occasionally now, if I ever get on court with kind of some of the younger guys, I kind of will replicate what he did. And one of the kind of interesting things that he did was sometimes he'll start a training session and not actually tell you how long it was going to go on for. So, he could be on court feeding you and getting you to do ghosting and court sprints and actually not even tell you how long the session was going to last. Sometimes it could last for half an hour. Sometimes it could last for kind of over 2 hours. So mentally, it was unbelievably tough to kind of, normally you can kind of gauge yourself and think, actually, I've got, only another 15, 20 minutes playing. Whereas Jonas, often wouldn't tell you how long the session was going to be. And in his mind, that was because you didn't know how long a squash match was going to be, which makes kind of perfect sense. But I've never known anyone else do that, actually. Another coach kind of, have that kind of mindset. And that's typical of Jonah.
I was with Jonah a lot from the age of sort of 16, 17, 18, 19, probably 20. He didn't drive when he was in Solihull. So I had this little Fiat 126, which we used to sort of both cramp inside. I used to race around on two wheels with him. And, we somehow got there. I used to take him to clinics and exhibitions. And that was special times, not necessarily playing much squash. I loved playing squash. It was a great experience, but just being around him, going back to his house, having a cup of tea. His wife, Madeline, was a very special person as well. They looked after me like their own child almost, they were brilliant. He was a father figure. He was a mentor, as well as being this immense inspiration to me. But just spending time around him was the most special thing. I look back now, just realising how lucky I was. At the time, like any young kid in 17, 18, you don't quite realise what you've got, because for me, it was the normal, being with him on a daily basis. I did some of his clinics with him, exhibitions. I remember as a young man at 17, 18, the first time I played in the Glassback, Jonah took me up to Warrington, and it was the ICI Perspex Masters. And I did an exhibition before the final with Jonah. We played a best of three, I think it was. And I think there's about 1,000 or 1,500 people watching. So I was petrified. But he just gave me those opportunities and he believed in me. And that made a big difference to my career. It meant it enabled me to become a squash professional. And for sure, without Jonah, I would have been on another path. I wouldn't have played squash professionally. And he brought out the very best to me. I tend to bring out the worst to myself, and he brought out the best.
I mean, he's the most sort of knowledgeable, charismatic person I've ever met, bar none. And I'm not sure I ever will meet anyone with, who you can sit and listen to 24 hours a day. He makes any subject interesting. He's got an incredible way of delivering advice. He's got an incredible way of delivering, whether it be a story or a way of putting something together that either as a young squash player or either off the court talking about anything else, he's got an incredible way of putting things across. And like I say, he just does it in such a charismatic way. So he's just so good at that.
He never stopped trying. It wouldn't have mattered what stage of the match was. He would always give it everything he's had. He lived, breathed, and ate squash just about. And he became extremely fit. So in the early days, I mean, he always had a fabulous serve, very good length player, and was relentless in trying to win. And on the hot court conditions, it's extremely difficult because it was hard to put the ball away against him. And I would play matches with him, and I used to rely on my running boast, I suppose, a lot to take people to the front of the court. I'd take Jonah up, and all he'd do was lob it back, and then I have to volley the thing or let it drop. And so I was forever trying to play out of the back corners. He was very, very good at keeping you in the back of the court and making things difficult for you. So he was, a very, very difficult customer to play. And as I said to you, he never gave up, and he was so fit. He was fitter than all of us, and really he was the one that inspired me to get fit for squash, because that was the one area that I thought I was lacking when I tried to come up against him, was the fact that he was fitter than I was, and if he could keep me on the court long enough, well, he was going to beat me.
There's a ruthless side, but what's so amazing about him is his ruthless side was because he didn't want to lose. He didn't want to lose matches. He wanted to win. He wanted to win. But having known him as a father and as a husband, and what he did with my mum, who was very ill for a long, long period of time, and she passed away last September, that he cared for her at home for over 10 years, solely pretty much. And there's the huge caring side to him. He's got this mix of being this ultimate warrior that would be as brave as anything and look to take everything and dominate the sport. But he also has this caring side. He helped so many players, even when he was playing. He gave Geoff Hunt advice. I'm sure Geoff Hunt will say the same, of helping him with his cramps to get through these major long matches. He helped so many players throughout, even when he was playing, let alone after his career. And it's just an aura. You can't explain. Certain people have auras without sounding like a too wacky a wacky hippie from Glastonbury, which I'm certainly not, although I've cut my hair a bit and got a beard. But people have auras and presence. He walks into a room and you just kind of gravitate towards him. He's a terrific looking guy, which helps, but he has an amazing charisma. And when he speaks, you just listen, and he's so articulate. And I think that he was so unusual and so articulate and intelligent as well, that people would take notice of him. And what all these different elements that he brought to the sport, with the physicality, but the professionalism and so much excitement.
Well, I guess there's determination. I'm trying to think of all the right adjectives for it, but someone who doesn't give up, but also if you can do something and you can do it better, you're going to keep going at it. And I think that's what he did. He could see that he needed to improve with his fitness and his training and his skills, and he worked on that. And, determination is one of the obvious words that comes to mind. His effort and his work ethic was phenomenal, and he was able to really instill that into anyone that's ever gone on court with him. And I think then it's just the pure passion and listening to him talk, and any time he went on court, and I had the pleasure of going on court and hitting with him. It was a combination of fun, hard work, but you could really feel the passion.
Jonah, I think, was he was a great coach. He was obviously a fantastic player. So there's always that doubt of just because you're a great player doesn't mean you're going to become a great coach. He was a great coach. I've never met anybody who knows every little facet of the game as well as he does, whether it be physical, mental, technical, the whole thing. He knows everything about it. So, but we need to remember, he was a pioneer. He was the first guy. He was a guinea pig himself. So he tried all these training methods on himself. He fine-tuned them until he knew it was exactly right. And being around at that young age, I was lucky that I had a sort of pretty good sort of brain, and I could understand what was going on. Tactically, I was very good, and I just watched and listened. And that's one of the great things. You're around those great people, and you can learn off them. And I'm using those methods now. I coach top players now, and I'm still using the methods that Jonah taught me. Sort of, what are we now? It's 40 years ago. And it's as applicable now as it was then, for sure. Of course, things have changed and been fine-tuned a little bit more. And the game has changed, but fundamentally, I still use the same principles that Jonah taught me 40 years ago to still train and coach top players. And I think I've proven that what Jonah taught then is just as valid now. I think strength of character and personality just stands out to me. He's got such a strong personality, but he has this incredible charisma that he walks in a room and it lights up. So, whoever he speaks to, they're infused. Whatever he talks about, he could talk about gardening, he'd be enthusiastic. You want to go out and do your garden. So it's not just squash. He's one of these rare people that you meet that just have this incredible charisma. I've met through my other jobs, through professional gambling and through my racing things. I've met a lot of famous people. I've never met anybody like Jonah, not in any way. I've met lots of special people who've been amazing sportsmen, world champions, top of the tree. I've still yet to meet someone like Jonah Barrington, and that just about says it all.
I got a couple of funny stories about Jonah. He was one of those characters. I mean, he was very articulate. I used to love watching him speak and everything. But he lost in a match. I think it was to one of the Pakistani players, Mohamed Yassin, when we played at Warrington once, and he came off the court and he's lost. And then I wonder where he'd gone to. There he was. I caught him a short time afterwards. He was down on the oval. He was sprinting down the sides and jogging around the ends, and he kept doing that. I don't know how long he did it for. This after having a very hard, tough match against Yassin. Yassin won it, but he kept doing that. I think probably, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes non-stop until he was physically ill. and then he came in. I thought, well, I don't know whether it was punishment or whatever it was, but certainly it was his way of coping with defeat at that time, which is a very, very funny thing for me to see,
But no, he invented ghosting. Again, I think he did that specifically to combat Kumar Zaman, who at the time was a wizard with a racket. And he brought a new dimension to the game. It was very attacking, a lot of short, sharp movements. And again, he was the pioneer in a lot of training methods, and ghosting was just one of those. And now we talk about ghosting as if, everyone does it, it's always been there. But we forget that it was Jonah that invented that for a specific reason, along with many other things with squash, the solos, a lot of the weight training, some of the S&C stuff that you see now. It all started with Jonah. He was one of the first guys to really use weights as a program, the ghosting, some of the running he used to do. He was way ahead of his time. He was probably 30, 40 years ahead of his time with some of the training that he did. So, I mean, obviously we all laugh about him training his underpants, but he did do that. It was astonishing. He had he had the garden all set out as a squash court, and he'd ghost there, and then he had a gym at home. He found a way to use everything from home.
But yeah, no, the underpants were the mainstay. The white, very Speedo-like underpants as well. So it wasn't like any kind of baggy boxer shorts or long boxer shorts. No, it was the full Monty, should I say? When the sun was shining, yeah, he's a massive sun worshipper, and he'd be out on the lawn and doing it. But also, we used to go on holiday quite a bit. Luckily when we were younger on family holidays, and he'd love a marking out of a squash court on the beach, and you have his kind of very funky kind of Speedos, which were the norm back then. It wasn't something that was slightly creepy, which you perceive as now. They were the norm to wear, the Speedos back then. And he would be ghosting. And then there was this one time when we were in South Africa, and he was ghosting on the beach. And I reckon there's probably between 40 and 50 people that after probably 20 to 30 minutes just congregated watching him, just in absolute awe and bemusement of this guy looking like he was swatting flies, but other people realizing he was training and just staring at him, and probably having a little bit of a bit of admiration on his physique and everything else. But that was pretty funny. And I'd just be there causing havoc, with the sand and getting in the sea while that was going on. That was like a normal Barrington day, a holiday day out on the beach, really.
Funny stories. I mean, I remember one time at West Warwick, we played regularly, and in those days there was no such thing as the internet, and you couldn't book courts online, so we used to have to write our name down. And I'd always book the courts, so I'd put down Barrington Owen, and we'd book the court from 5 till 7. It was a long time. Those courts, the courts are busy. There's a long waiting list. People used to watch us play. We'd often have 30 people watching us play, 30, 40 people. So I always remember one day, I was there in the morning, we'd done our practice together, we had a little hit, we were playing a match in the evening, and I just wrote down Barrington Kumar Zaman on the booking sheet, who was one of the famous guys that we're talking about. He was a wizard of the game, amazing player. Didn't think anything of it, went back to Jonah's, cup of tea, bit of cake that Madeline made us as usual. Got the car, I drove back, got to the club, 4:45, 4:30, whatever, for our warm-up. And the car park was absolutely rammed. And I thought, this is a bit odd. This is very strange. There must be a hockey match on or something else going on, because it was hockey and cricket in those days as well, tennis. Walked in, and there was a sort of buzz of excitement about the place. I just felt it in the air. There was this atmosphere, and I sort of got warmed up, and I still thought, this is very strange. Anyway, one of the old boys came up to me, and he sort of said, is he here yet? Is he here? And I said, well, yeah, Jonah's here. We're going to play an all match. No, where's Kumar? And it suddenly dawned on me, I put down Barrington Zaman on the booking sheet, and we walked out there, and We went on court and it was absolutely rammed. It was rammed. They were hanging off the rafters, people there. And Jonah said, "What's going on, Rob?" And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry. I put down Mohamed Barrington on the booking form." We must have had 200 people there. They were queuing. They come from other clubs. It was absolute carnage. And obviously, off we went. He gave me a bollocking, obviously. Started off, and the first point was probably one of the hardest points out of my life. It was about a 5-minute rally. And I could just see, I thought, I'm in trouble here. This is going to be a disaster. And sure enough, he absolutely battered me. But he punished me as well. 30 sets of ghosts at the end of the game as well. As per normal, walked off a dribbling mess. And that was it. So many stories like that. That was Jonah.
He wrote 3 books, just to briefly talk about it. One was called The Book of Jonah, which he wrote in the late 60s when he was just starting to win major titles, and reading his thought process and what it was there. It's a fascinating book. It's brilliant because it was when he was younger in that time. And then you've got the iconic Murder in the Squash Court, which he wrote in 81, and his autobiography, which is obviously fantastic, which is of the same time. They went out of print quite a long time ago, but we are re-establishing all 3. He's also looking to add extra chapters to Murder in the Squash Court, which will be something further down the line. But it's extraordinary what people are selling Murder in the Squash Court for on eBay. I just looked literally yesterday, and it's 201 books trying to get 240 pounds for a signed copy, which they do. It's extraordinary. So it's been in demand, and we're gonna relaunch it all so everyone can have it as a copy or e-copy, so we can just get his story out there and get people excited about things a little bit, and educated about the history of the game, more importantly.